So Southern Africa, what are we likely to see? Because in SADC as a whole, of those 14 countries, you do have some stellar performers in Mozambique, in Angola, recovery in an economy like Namibia, mining in Botswana. So some would say lots of optimism.
We are taking a slightly more bearish outlook on Southern Africa. We are forecasting growth of about 3.8% for the Southern African region for this year, mainly due to the fragile global economy. If there is a major blowout in the Eurozone, there's going to be major ramifications for the entire world, and Africa is no exception to that. So I think that is probably our biggest reason for our slightly more bearish outlook for the region.
We know that obviously the JSE is the one that's most susceptible to international variables. South Africa, a major trading partner with Europe, the carry trade and the rand, but that isn't necessarily the story for some members of the Southern African development community. Why would you take this bearish stance? Because like I said, I mentioned in Angola, for instance, it seems to be immune to some of these other issues.
I think definitely if you're looking at an average over the region, then the growth level is lower than it was last year, but there are certain outliers like your Mozambique, your Angola, great opportunities in Namibia. So there's clear outliers on both ends.
Okay. I think currency is going to be a big issue because a lot of the customs union countries depend heavily on trade with South Africa and have pegged their currencies to the South African rand. What are your expectations there?
Well, on the currency side, it's a very difficult one to call because a lot of the dynamics affecting the rand is not domestic dynamics. They are US driven, they are Euro driven, and they are very much developed markets driven. So I think a lot depends on this year and what happens in the Eurozone.
We also have the outliers, I like that term, the stronger performers in Southern Africa, and then you have the weaker ones. And just recently we were talking about a bailout for Swaziland, and in December already we were already being told that civil servants weren't being paid on time. That's the extent to which that economy is cash strapped. So for those that don't perform, how badly is their situation going to be?
Well, I think if you're looking at your worst performers for this year, it's consistently been Zimbabwe for a number of years, and I think we're going to see that this year as well. The country has been doing pretty well on the economic front, but I think the greatest difficulty Zimbabwe faces is that its economic progress is always overshadowed by its political instability. And I think as much as the ZANU-PF and President Mugabe have stated that there would be elections this year, it could very well be deferred to next year. And I think in the lead up to those elections and even post those elections, there's going to be an even further uptick in political instability.
Yes, we did speak to the editor of the Zimbabwe Independent yesterday, and he did say by all indications that election won't happen this year, probably the referendum on the constitution, but so many jitters around indigenization and how mining companies and banks feel as though they are just being a target of a greedy regime, to paraphrase the sentiment. So for investors looking at the opportunities that exist in Zimbabwe, because they are there, particularly mining and agriculture, the political environment is going to be the deterrent, you're suggesting?
I absolutely agree with that. I think the next election is going to be your real trump card. I think if the ZANU-PF does manage to secure a win, you're going to see some discontent locally as well as some discontent on the international community as well, because they will continue to question the validity of that sort of result. However, if you find the MDC winning that election, then you're going to, you could very well see a faction of the ZANU-PF that's not willing to accept defeat, and unrest could come from there. So I think the political side will very much determine FDI into Zimbabwe going forward.
Zimbabwe's got some hidden jewels. So some would say, irrespective of the political environment, the infrastructure is great, we'll be gung-ho and get in there. That doesn't seem to be the take when it comes to Swaziland. That's a country that's heavily indebted and is in heavy need of IMF and World Bank support and FDI. Are they going to get it?
The truth is, since we last spoke on Swaziland, there's been little to no progress made. The country went through a severe deterioration last year, and I really see that going into the first 6 months of this year at least as well. The IMF concluded their last mission to Swaziland in November last year, and to put it in their words, the fiscal crisis in Swaziland had reached a critical stage. Government revenue collections are not enough to meet their recurrent expenditure, their social programs are suffering, and so forth. So the outlook for Swaziland is not very positive going forward, and as far as them securing money from a multilateral organization being in the state that they're in at the moment, I don't think it's going to happen over the next few months.
Obviously, we've seen Christine Lagarde come to South Africa as she begins her tour of Africa, and the IMF has basically said they don't expect stellar growth on the continent in general, and we know subdued growth at 3% in South Africa. So to a large extent we'll be better than what they are in Europe, for instance, but we're still underperforming by way of our own expectations to create jobs and to grow the economies. So how do we cope as Southern Africa in
Well,
general?
I think during the good years, our growth levels were so good as well. And now, because we are so tied on the international stage as well, not just South Africa, but many countries via South Africa as well. And we've seen a shift of power from the east to the west. So you see a lot more Asian trade happening now. So I think that's definitely going to be the trend going forward. Whereas it's always been the Western trade historically, now we're going to see much more from India, China, and rest of the Asia focus on the country. So I think that's going to be our selling point going forward.